Hello, my name is Meredith Kutz, a Professional Development Associate here at NACE. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Successful Student Hiring, a peer learning discussion with Cargill, Target, and General Mills. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Donna Weiss, Head of Graduate Solutions at SHL. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for today's NACE Insights and Solutions webinar. I'm thrilled to be joining this session today with everybody, talking about successful student hiring. So I know folks are in the queue dialing in and getting kind of pulled in here too. And really promises to be a really engaging hour where we will have time for your questions in addition to hearing from the panelists, who I'll turn to in a minute to introduce themselves too. So one of the things that we really know has really happened across this last year, across the board, is just a lot of organizations kind of like shifting their different programs, even thinking about this summer and some intern programs, which many of you have just started, really kind of beginning there too. And so wanted to make sure that we were able to bring insights to the group and share a little bit of the lessons learned and tips for success that some of the panelists have learned across planning for this summer, but also as you look ahead very rapidly to fall campus hiring. And even though we might be in the midst of running programs right now, we know that there's still uncertainty out there. And so even just talking through across the board with others, want to make sure that we have that too. So everyone knows kind of that old playbook has been shifting across the past year or so. Hopefully things like return to work policies, engaging students virtually as well as in person. We want to make sure that we're engaging with everyone there too. So I'm thrilled to be joined by everyone today too. And I think we're in the process of also getting Mark on camera too. But with that, I'm actually going to be presenting the slide here. So why don't I pull that up here while we go ahead and get started here. You guys should hopefully see my screen there. Okay, great. And so with that, we'll turn in a moment, to the introductions, from everybody. So I'm going to then adjust here while we get everybody kind of started here. And I know Mark will introduce himself when we get into, but why don't we go ahead and get started here with Elizabeth from General Mills. So pleased to have you here today. I'll turn it to you to kick us off.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Elizabeth Diley. I lead campus recruiting at General Mills. That includes our early career program, so hiring directly off of campus. And then my team also runs our internship program throughout the summer. Excited to be here. General Mills is home to the iconic brands that you see behind me, from Cheerios to Yoplait yogurt, Betty Crocker. So it's a fun company to work for. Again, excited to be here. Thank you, SHL and NACE, for hosting us today.
Great, thank you. I'll turn it to Mark as soon as he joins in the queue here too. But Megan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Grimm. I lead campus recruitment for Target. So also home of iconic brands, some of our own, but then we carry iconic brands like what Elizabeth has behind her. And so I've been at Target for 16 years. Retail is just, a joy to be a part of right now. It is so disruptive. It is changing. It is hard and it is challenging, but it's a ton of fun. And so I've been with Target majority in talent acquisition roles and other HR functions as well. But my fun fact for the group today is I actually started with Target as an intern first. And so to be coming back to a panel, which is where I got my start in terms of my career, it's really fun to be with this group today. So thanks for having us.
Excellent. And just to introduce myself as well too, Donna Weiss, I look after our global graduate solutions here with SHL. Many of you might have come across SHL at some point. We are the world's largest assessment technology provider. We're helping companies and organizations help more accurate people decisions. And so I've been helping both from a research standpoint as well as leading our product solutions as well. We've been around for over 40 years, helping over 10,000 customers. And what I'll just say from a campus hiring and early career perspective as well, working with clients in all around the globe, it really is a struggle. as we know, for organizations to secure the top talent for their businesses. So whether it's talking about, greater, brand advocacy, helping to understand, what our brands mean on campus, obviously with this virtual world, even sort of like coming into different play here too, lots of things that are frankly not unique to any one organization that we're certainly hearing about within the US, but also for those, multinational organizations that operate multinationally across many countries. The challenges are real and felt kind of across the board. And so I think that's what's really, thankful for NACE for being able to, host this type of discussion and dialogue in a very productive way. And so with that in mind, I'm going to take us into the next slide here. And, really quickly, as I mentioned, we will have time for your questions. So you can enter them into the kind of chat or the Q&A function as well, too. So we'll spend about 45 minutes or so with the discussion here too. We'll share some data and insights here from our end, as well as hear from the panelists' experience in today's hiring environment, what they're seeing kind of out there too. We'll make sure we spend some time talking about how to really stand out amidst obviously what is a very crowded and at least for the past year quite virtual experience that many students have experienced, whether on campus virtually, on campus live. So how can organizations really kind of stand out in that regard? And regardless of whether you're a large name brand company or even not as well known in some cases too. So what are some tips that the panel will want to share based on that? We'll also spend some time talking about making great talent decisions. And one area which I think is oftentimes maybe not as much time is spent on is how are we actually making those selection decisions of who to give an internship to, which interns should we offer for full-time hire? And then obviously once we bring those individuals on board, how are we really effectively making those decisions and onboarding, supporting those new early career talent? And then we'll definitely spend some time talking about some top tips that the group has kind of summarized from there too. And then, as I mentioned, we'll turn to you and leave time for your questions directly of the panelists, all panelists or anyone in specific too. So that's kind of where we'll kind of like take it from there too. And I just wanted to sort of turn and start out by with some data here too. Really, certainly what we know to be the case, obviously, some NACE data as well, where we saw nearly all recruiters, right, almost over 90%, saying that at least a portion of their hiring was done virtually. And so we know that as we talked about earlier, with people talking about that playbook really needing to shift across the last year. And I'm going to turn it to the panelists in a minute to get their perspective on, what that is and how that has impacted them. And so with that, I'm going to sort of pause here my screen share to bring everybody kind of back up on screen to be able to say, love to hear a little bit more about what your plans are for this summer as we kind of commenced in that regard too. So Megan, why don't I go ahead and turn it to you? Tell us a little bit about what your plans are for this summer and then how, if at all, did that change from prior years?
Yeah, absolutely. So this summer, we're actually doing a similar playbook to what we had. Oh, our friend Mark is here. I feel like we got to pause and do some yes, cheers and introductions.
Hi, Mark. If you go off mute, let's make sure we can hear you. We can see you. So
can you hear me?
Yes, great. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. I know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm using my phone now. I gave up on my computer. So apologies to everybody.
No, thank you so much for joining. And if there's anybody on the line who has not experienced something like this in the last year, where some technical difficulties with, I don't care which platform it was, you can actually mention that in the chat, because I would be very shocked if we had anybody mention that they didn't have any issues. So Megan, if you don't mind, Mark, may I turn it to you to actually do your introduction as well too? We had just finished introing the group, as you probably heard as you were dialing in the queue here. So we just gave our brief intros, and then Megan, I'll turn it back to you. So Mark.
All right. Again, apologies to everybody. Mark Hosmann with Cargill, been with the company for 20 years. I lead university recruiting for the organization. So excited to be with you today, and hopefully the technology will work from this point on forward.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks so much, Mark. And Megan we were just turning to Megan to hear a little bit more about what their plans were, what her plans for her team and organization are for this summer. So Megan, go ahead.
Yeah. So Mark, so glad you're here. We're glad you made it in. So at Target, we are running kind of a similar playbook to last year. Our corporate interns will be virtually for the second year in a row. And then we're keeping our interns that are in stores and in distribution centers across the nation in those stores and buildings. And so what I would say is we're lucky to have a playbook from last year to build upon. We took different formats because of the needs and the complexities across businesses, which I would say has been a learning through all of this disruption is it can't be a one size fits all approach in many cases. And what I would say is like, we are certainly going to build upon what we did last year, but I think we're all expecting student expectations to go up. There was a lot of grace shared within students and employers kind of figuring it out last year. But I think all of us are saying we're getting more comfortable and we want to get back to really being able to invest meaningfully in the students and the students to invest meaningfully in the business. So I think the expectations are going to go up, but I think we're ready for it.
Great, fantastic. Well, thanks to hear about that, Megan. Elizabeth, why don't I turn it to you next to hear about your summer plans?
Yeah, it's very similar to Target, and you'll probably see a theme here from all of us, but we did go virtual last year. We kept our internship and made some modifications to the timeline. For this summer, though, we are keeping most of our interns virtual, but like Target, the ones that are actually in our food manufacturing facility, so different than the distribution center and the stores, but the places where they're really needed to be hands-on, we are going to be bringing them in person this year. So we're excited to be able to bring those students into the plant and get that experience. Last year, we did condense the internship into 6 weeks. We are going back to our full 10 weeks this summer. But I would just have to echo what Megan was saying. I think what we bring this year is really going to need to be leveled up from last year because students are expecting more. They heard from the interns last year, and all of the companies should have learned as well that did go virtual what worked and what they can enhance for this upcoming summer. And now the question really is, with things opening up, what does that mean for the end of summer? And obviously the question on everybody's mind, what does that mean for fall recruiting as well? So that's just a little glimpse into what General Mills is doing for our interns this summer.
Great, thank you. And we will come back to, and we will do a poll in a couple minutes just to get a pulse of those on the line about that too, is preparing for fall. I know that's something that all of us are kind of curious about what folks are starting to think about. With that, Mark, I'll turn it to you to get a sense so you can share what plans are for Cargill this summer.
Yeah, very similar to Megan and Elizabeth. We have over 400 interns and co-ops that are with us this summer. We've actually started a couple hundred of them already this week, with the vast majority that'll be starting next week. Our internships, like theirs, were shortened a bit last year, and we're done all virtual. This year, we also will have some of our interns on site, particularly our plant and manufacturing interns will be on site. And then the more corporate office-based interns will be done virtually. So yeah, very similar stories to them. We're excited about getting going again and giving a great experience to our interns.
Great, fantastic. I think that's definitely one of the things that even as we had met to talk about preparing for this session, that there is a lot of uncertainty. You guys all had to make a call, right? In some cases, with very little information or what information was out at the time. And as of course we know, even since we last talked about this too, guidance keeps changing, right? Just in some cases every day, and at a minimum it feels like every week. And of course that's, in some cases by necessity, but love to hear a little bit more about the decision-making process that you went through, going into this year too, if anybody had any thoughts around that too, or things that, processes that you needed to follow and tips that you might share about that.
Yeah,
Mark,
I can start.
to you.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. We first started and foremost with safety in mind, and that's true to Cargill's culture, is putting people first and making sure they, anything we do, that they can be safe. And so that was first and foremost what went into it. We did take into account feedback that we were hearing directly from the interns that we were hiring. We surveyed them to get their input on, do they want to be on site? Do they want to be done virtually? What do they feel comfortable with? We also talked to our internal stakeholders to get their perspective of what are they hoping for out of the summer. Those data points, we ultimately made the decisions that we did to determine which of our interns would be done on site versus virtual to give them the best experience that they possibly could, but keeping safety in mind.
Great. Megan or Elizabeth, anything else to add on that front, on the decision-making process you went through?
I don't know that I have a ton to add other than like we kept talking about like scenarios and how do we build an optionality to react. And so once we did make some of those decisions, I think what also helped us is how do we keep a pulse on how it's going. So for interns last year, for example, it was the first time we did things virtually. And so we did do more kind of pulse surveys to students and our mentors and managers to ask some really key questions and just to not assume that we got everything right. And I think just knowing everything is going to probably evolve, kind of checking in has been important. But like Mark said too, you got to know what your guardrails are in terms of your North Star, because if you can't be true to your strategy and the decisions that matter most, you can go chasing a lot of stuff. And so it was being really consistent with what are those guardrails, and then what are we willing to be able to flip and evolve to really help support all of the stakeholders and students kind of through the process.
That's a great point, Elizabeth.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, we're students and stakeholders are the main thing, and like Cargill, safety is number one concern too at General Mills. But the thing too that I would just pose for the folks on the call is thinking through too your network, right? So Megan and Mark and I for sure have been talking a lot over the last few years, probably with a lot of you guys on the call as well. And for those newer in campus TA, make sure to find those people too, because a lot of the companies were waiting for other companies to make the call, and sometimes it was nice to have an in with the other companies of what they were going to be doing, because again, we wanted to make sure that students had consistency as well.
I see. So thank you all. I see one comment coming in, which I just wanted to acknowledge here too, that in some ways, the comment is, Mark, I want to be you when I grow up, but just because of the breadth and the number of interns, and I know you guys all host a lot of interns too, but certainly something that I would say from both from the scale of the organizations that we're talking to today, but working with organizations that even if you have 5 interns, right, or if you have 500 interns, right, a lot of these things that we're talking about, the guardrails, the aligning to strategy piece too. I mean, I think, the pulse surveys, the adjusting and keeping flexible, I think those are all themes that regardless of scale, you can certainly take back, to your own organizations with that. With that too, I did want to shift us and actually ask NACE to pull up the first poll so we can get a little bit more flavor and feeling for those who have on the line here too, to actually ask about what are your current plans for fall 2021. So obviously we're kind of locked in, as we all are, to our summer plans too. It was great to hear where the panelists are on that. But if you could answer the question that you see on your screen, what are your current plans for fall 2021? And then go ahead and choose, and then we can all see it. And I will turn then in a minute to the panelists to get their feedback and perspectives on what we're seeing here. So we'll give it just maybe a couple more seconds here for voting. I think based on what I'm starting to see, and here we're sharing the results. So we've closed the polling. And see the different results. So I'll just, read them out as well too. So perhaps not a surprise to the group, but again, would love to turn to you for reflections. 69% majority saying both live on site and virtual, followed by in second place, a third saying virtual only, and then a small percentage saying live on site only too. So, again, Mark, maybe I'll turn it to you first to get us started off too, since you're the one who's on mute. So I'm gonna talk to you to say, what's your sort of feedback or thoughts on this too? Is this surprising here?
Yeah, not surprised by the results at all. I think, there's a real balance that we're all dealing with right now, is trying to keep in mind again safety and the needs, and how can we be competitive in going after talent. I can tell you that we are thinking of that both option. We probably won't go to as many schools or events as we have in person this year as we historically done, but we do anticipate we'll need to be at some schools and events in order to attract and compete for top talent. So I think we're planning a mix, some both virtual and some on site. I can tell you that currently we do not have approval to travel in Cargill. And so that will be something that we're going to have to address if that continues into the fall, likely seeking some variances so that we could go to some events. We think it will be important to compete for talent, as we don't think virtual only will be sufficient, but won't plan to go to as many as we have historically.
Great, thanks. Elizabeth, I'll turn to you to share what's happening with your organization.
Yeah, we also don't have approval to travel quite yet. We're waiting on some of those guidelines, and I know a lot of companies are in that same situation. But like Mark, I think we are really going to look at the sources of talent and where we really need to be on the ground with the teams. There's a few key schools that General Mills partners with that we get a lot of students from that maybe we're being on the ground and going to those different events. What events look like, I think, will be really telling to what we can do. If it's an info session with 25 students in a room versus, a huge national conference with thousands of people walking around, I think those are going to be the risks that we're going to have to evaluate with our HR professionals as well, and with the guidelines that the company seeks out. I will say again, we don't want to be left in the dust, and we don't want to not do something and be too conservative. So there are discussions about us going back to campus to make sure we secure that talent.
Great, thanks. Megan, from your perspective?
Yeah, I would add, like, my option would have been option D. I don't know yet, which I feel like is like, I laugh because Elizabeth and Mark and I talk about it. It's kind of like, okay, at least we're in this together. Nobody quite knows what we can do yet, but we're planning for it. And I agree with everything that Elizabeth and Mark said. And I think what's hard is, like, what we're trying to start prepare our recruiters for is we're getting the invites that say schools or conferences also may give you the choice, participate in person or virtual. And that's a whole nother set of complexities, because what you plan for may not be what you get. We don't know how student preferences are going to play out. We don't know if people are going to pick one or both. And so I think it's just really preparing our teams that we can make the best plan as we can, but we still have to be flexible and willing to adapt. And we're going to learn a lot. I think the fact that Elizabeth kind of mentioned the level playing field of everybody being virtual last year had some advantages in terms of everybody was going at it from the same angle. And so I think it's going to be a really interesting fall to pick some decisions and learn, and then continue to evolve.
Yeah, if I could just add one more comment to that, because Megan, you touched on this briefly, but the importance of the agility of having a plan, but remaining flexible and agile, because the reality is we don't exactly know what's going to happen in the fall. We can go in with the best of intentions saying this is what we're going to do for this school or for this event, and all of a sudden we'll have a new spike in cases, and that plan might have to change. Or we might have a plan to do virtual and realizing, we're falling short on our applicants. We're not getting the attention because of the approach we might have to take. So now we have to shift again. And balancing, we also have to recognize that, I know at Cargill, with as many that we hire, we rely heavily upon volunteer recruiters, people in our businesses, to get out to these locations. We have to be conscious of how are they feeling about traveling? How are they feeling about going to different sites, and balancing that need to make sure that we can sufficiently staff with the parameters that are set forth as well.
Yeah, I would also just add on for Mark, like, a lot of folks may be even thinking, how do they influence their leadership on the strategy? And I think it's really important to remember what Megan said is we were all on the same level, the same playing field last year virtually. And so making sure that your leadership knows that things may be changing as you're starting to put your strategy together for this fall, where there are some companies, as we saw here on the poll, that are already dedicated to going live on campus. And so those are really important things to bring to your leadership, that the playing field is not going to be the same for this fall.
Yeah, no, those are great points too. And I think it actually brings us as a nice segue to the next part of our conversation here too, which is really kind of focused on, how much and how can we differentiate ourselves, whether it's virtual or live or any of those types of things too. So I'm just going to pull up one other data point here as well too. Let me get this into full screen mode for everybody. And so you'll be able to kind of just see here too that here's some data here around, on average, you should be able to see 23 is the number of jobs that students might apply for before they get hired. Now, you may know that students may be applying for less or more, right? So that means that some students are just bombarding, right? 40, 50 different organizations with that across the board. And so one of the things that I think would be really interesting to hear a little bit about from the group here too is, how have you tried to, stay differentiated for yourself? And so are there specific things that you've tried to really sort of stay unique and stand out for students there? Megan, why don't I turn to you first?
I guess I'll start with rather than just app flow, the how do you stay unique? I think we've talked a lot about it, quality of your interactions versus quantity, and why that's so important. And I think seeing so many applications coming in, it being a world of choice, but also a world of last minute cancellations or attendance, it just has been important for our team to stay close to the talent that they are really interested in and make those interactions feel meaningful. In some ways, virtual has helped us because it's easier to ask a leader, for example, to pick up the phone versus hop on a plane in terms of interactions. And then I would say maybe a more tactical tip for us that goes along with the quality versus quantity is just really evolving our virtual approach based on what we're seeing. And so the Zoom fatigue is like real. And so where I think we were seeing mass attendance in early stages, that's really changed. And so our approach has changed. We've used more functions like polling or breakout sessions to make it a two-way dialogue and a conversation versus a one-way presentation. And I think those moments have mattered for candidates to feel like they're playing a different role in terms of the engagement, which has been helpful for us.
Right. Mark?
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what Megan just said. I think we have had a large quantity of applicants. In the virtual world, we've actually had more applicants this year than we had when we would be doing a mix of on-site and virtual recruiting tactics. The key is finding the right applicants, the ones that are truly, genuinely interested in your organization. And that is difficult when you have thousands of applicants and in a virtual capacity where we haven't been able to necessarily build the same direct personal relationship. So I think a couple things that we've done, we've tried to be very targeted with our outreach efforts, leveraging Handshake and campaigns and doing things like that to find targeted audiences, and then invite, whether it's a school hosted event or our own event, to try to build those connections. Once we've established the connections, then it's how do we stay close to them and keep those strategies warm. So those are some things that we've been working on.
Mm-hmm. I'll also share that, and then Elizabeth, I'll turn it to you as well too. I think, that notion of, being able to kind of stay personal, and Megan, you mentioned the word meaningful as well, I think is really important. I wanted to just share some data from actually a marketing firm. So, a lot of times you'll hear talent acquisition can be, parallel from, thinking about from marketing principles being brought into the recruiting space too. So some lessons for marketing. I think marketing firm Grazidi found that 88% of US marketers saw sales increase due to personalization. So when there are ways to kind of make things a little bit more personal there too, and I liked how you use that language there of like meaningful and making things a little bit kind of more personal there too, as a way not only to stand out, but Mark, to your point, making sure you're finding the right applicants, right? Don't just apply to my organization because like you've heard of us, make sure that it's meaningful to you. If this is going to be work that you want to do. And that's really a great point about the quality versus the quantity point as well too. Elizabeth, let me turn it to you as well though for your comments.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the chat here, and I'm chuckling at the we want more needles and less hay, because I think General Mills also saw an uptick in applications this year, and you've got Mark with 20 years of TA experience, Megan with 13 plus, myself with 13 plus, most in the campus recruiting side, and we probably can all remember the day that you just went to conferences and campus to get the talent. And now candidates are hitting us from everywhere. If it's our own personal email to our LinkedIn, now we've got Handshake, we've got Ripple Match, we've got all these different tools and ways to connect with students. And I think it can be overwhelming, for team members in the TA space. And I think trying to find those students that are really passionate about your business or passionate about, for us specifically, about the food sector and working in CPG is very important now, and getting to the heart of that with students. Taking the engagement just one step further, we really concentrate too on the engagement after the offer and after the accept. General Mills did see an uptick in renegs this year, and I know many companies have. And we're trying to combat that in different ways. And one thing that my team really is thinking about is how to keep that engagement after the official yes has been made. And we have run campaigns through sending our Betty Crocker baking kit, to all of our interns to bake cakes and like asking them to post it on LinkedIn. And it's exciting because even our senior leadership is then commenting on some of those posts, making those students feel good, making them ingrained in our business before they even start, or asking them to go out, in a pre-pandemic world, to go out to a grocery store, to go out to a Target and see our products on shelf and send us a fun picture with that. And so finding ways after the initial offer accept is really important to get them engaged in your business prior to.
Excellent. I actually want to pull up and ask NACE to pull up the second poll, because I think it'd also be helpful as we maybe shift now for the last 15 minutes of this conversation here, to get a sense of those kind of top concerns for those on the line here too. So you'll see the top next poll come up here too. And so again, as you think ahead to fall hiring, for your organizations, which of these is your top concern? Now, admittedly, these are not all the concerns that you certainly can have. That is for sure known. And so it just, as we think about of these four, and great, lucky for you, anybody on the line who doesn't have at least one of these is your top concern, but of these four, which one would you say is your top concern here too? So differentiating your brands, employment brand, dealing with those high applicant volumes, ensuring we make good selection decisions, and setting those new hires up for success. So we'll give that a minute to really kind of come in here too, or a couple seconds, I should say. And then once the polling ends, then again, love to turn it to the panelists to give their reflections and perspectives on this too. So, okay, here we have, you should see the poll results coming up right now too. Yeah, sorry for the tough question there too, but again, no shortage of issues, but at least as it pertains to these four, it's kind of interesting just to see when you're kind of given that forced choice, it actually, helps to kind of structure a little bit of the conversation. So differentiating your employment brand came in first, 55%. We talked obviously a little bit about that as well too. Followed next percentage-wise by ensuring we make good selection decisions, right? And so when we think about making the right decisions for our organizations, a third of you said that that is a top concern as you look ahead to fall. Followed next by setting those new hires up for success, 20%. And then, follow closely by dealing with those high applicant volumes at 17%. So really, really interesting then in that regard. So want to sort of turn it to you, Mark, maybe I'll start with you to get your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I think, like you said, Donna, it's a great list. It's not the only list. There are other issues and concerns as well. Personally, the ranking order resonated with me. I would have ranked them that way as well. Cargill, I think, we have General Mills and Target and Cargill on this call. I'm guessing most of the people on this call have heard of Target and General Mills. I'm guessing not everyone on this call has heard of Cargill. And that is a constant us being a privately held company, as large as we are, as global as we are. We're an agricultural company without branded products on the shelves. And so we're not as well known. And that has always been a challenge for us, is how do we stand out and distinguish ourselves? Add to that in a virtual capacity, and it makes it that much more difficult when you can't be on site talking with people, building those personal relationships, which is important to us. So that would have been the way I would have answered that question as well, Donna.
Right. No, interesting to see how, sort of the data came into and the different perspectives there too. Megan, love to get your thoughts and on that as well.
Similar ranking. And I think it's interesting because, I opened with my introduction about my interest and excitement for retail, but not all retailers are performing well right now. And so when you think about Target and the industry that we're in, our earnings that we released yesterday were phenomenal, but there's a lot of retailers that are struggling. And so when you think about what's on students' minds in general about the retail narrative, we've had to think a lot about that in our position and make sure that there's comfortability that Target has a long, innovative path forward. And I think the other thing is we've really spent a lot of time leaning into employment brand in terms of the softer side, our culture, our response to things that students we know care about, the pandemic, social injustice, and the role that we choose to play with our communities, with our team members. And so I think it's been important too to not assume that the same considerations are still at the top of the list, that different things may matter as well. And so I think it goes back to some of the personalization and understanding what matters, the authenticity in terms of being able to be transparent about where things are going well as where you're still on a journey. I think that's really important too, in terms of students knowing what to expect as they come in and are set up for success in some of the other pieces that are even on this poll.
Great, thanks, Megan. And Elizabeth, curious to get your perspectives too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our applications have been up, but there's application areas that have been down. And, info sessions at core schools are one of those things, or career fairs. And, that really is to talent branding, in my opinion, because, I've got all these great products behind me, but, the General Mills G, again, great logo, all of that. But really what sells are these things behind me. And when you're in a virtual setting, that's hard to convey. A lot of students may just walk by our booth and see these beloved brands behind us and then stop, and then we get a chance to talk to them. So, at our core schools, we actually saw things dip because, people didn't associate General Mills with the brands behind me, or didn't see that funness as we were walking through a virtual career fair. And so it's something that we had to combat. And, I think to Megan's point, we really shifted our thought process to things that students care about as well. From the environment to the entrepreneurship and the regeneration of farmlands, things that are on people's mind. And so that's something we really concentrated, especially in the initial conversations with students, to find out where their passions were, because that's really how you should be looking at companies too, making sure it aligns with your values. So going back to the basics and looking at the values and making sure that students are connecting with that. The second topic, I think, is assessing students and making sure that you're making great choices. And, I would really look to folks to think about who's interviewing, who's representing your brand, what level that they are in the company, and how they interact even with early career folks that are at your company now. Not all my recruiters do all of the interviewers. Like Mark at Cargill, we have a lot of volunteers from our businesses that do that assessment. And I would really make sure that they're trained in interview skills, in unconscious bias, in other areas, to make sure they are making the right decisions, because it's so important. We actually moved down from more senior leadership doing the interviewing to more mid-level managers, and sometimes even to newer managers doing assessment because they're closer to the work. And we found some of our executives were getting really far from that work of an early career intern or first year out of college. And the students were connecting better with some of the younger, more or less tenure folks on the recruiting team, thinking about potentially moving to Minneapolis, thinking about moving to one of our plant locations across the country. And so really, I would ask the people on the call to think about who's representing your brand, and if they're in touch with what's happening in that early career space as well.
I think that's a great point. I'm going to pull up sort of two more data slides too. We'll kind of maybe talk about them together in the context of shifting to the selection. Some great comments here also around making sure, the new students also feel truly welcome to succeed in their role, certainly either from a D&I perspective, but even just from an ongoing onboarding perspective, or even during the selection process, as you mentioned, Elizabeth, when you're, who do you have actually interviewing there? I think those are all really great points, to be taken too. I'll also just remind folks, because we do want to turn to Q&A in a couple minutes, so feel free to go ahead and insert your questions in the Q&A box. So we'll have a queue ready to go in just a few minutes. And again, you can address your questions, either to any one of the specific panelists or to the panel sort of more broadly. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull up this too, because it's certainly relevant to the fact that what we talked about as well, around, who is it that you're having to do the interviewing, and what is it, and what is important about what are they trying to find at the end of the day? And, just sharing some research, that we have done from SHL, and obviously, we do assess early career, students, youth. We survey, we have assessments from over 1.5 million students every year globally. But just when you're thinking about the types of things and the types of challenges and a lot of the work and analysis that we've done that seem to be very common across many organizations, and what they're looking for in a lot of cases for those first roles are things such as working in that cross-functional team to help solve a business challenge, learning a new skill or application through self-directed learning, building relationships in an unfamiliar team. I'd venture to guess that all the panelists, as well as those on the line, have at least one, if not all of these, as some of the types of things that they might be looking for, or that their hiring managers might be looking for across the board. And so just to kind of also share, in some cases, data would suggest that we might in some cases be falling short when it comes to actually providing either, that good partnership between talent acquisition and hiring managers in terms of, collaborating about, the importance of that quality. And yet, nearly you see almost, 58% of hiring managers feeling they don't even necessarily have the data to really make informed hiring decisions as part of the process too. And so I think there's just some really interesting pieces when you think about selection. And that was the, second top pain point that you saw come up in the poll. And this is certainly consistent with what we've seen, across the globe as well. I'd love to get the perspectives of the panelists on the line here too, to share a little bit more about, what are some of the ways that you are in your own organizations, and I've just pulled us back up here too, are actually helping your organizations decide which interns get that full-time offer, how you're giving the full-time offers there too, to really help the organizations really make those good quality decisions, making sure that, all of us on the line here too are those arbiters of quality for our organizations, regardless of the volume that we have to deal with. So Megan, why don't I start with you?
I'll start with interns because I think that's a quick one. I always joke that we also shortened our programs last year, and I heard from a lot of leaders, well, how are we going to make this decision? It's a shorter time frame and it's virtual. And I'm like, you hire people on 30-minute interactions all the time. You have all the time in the world to make your intern decisions. And so I think for interns, it's really just leaning in and making sure that you have really engaged teams, similar to what Elizabeth said in terms of selecting who are you having interviews. Same with interns. Who are you having mentor and manage? Who is going to lean in and invest and take the time to teach, but also assess? I think that's really important. And if you're hosting an internship, again, you should have plenty of time to make that decision. Full-time is harder. You are in a position where you have fewer data points. For us, I think a couple of things matter. I loved Elizabeth's comment about how are we training our interviewers? How are we thinking about consistency, unconscious bias? And the other thing at Target we talk a lot about is how important diversity in our selection is. We serve guests, and our guest base is incredibly diverse. And so when you think of areas like technology, that industry-wide, we are suffering with huge representation gaps. We not only have to ensure that we're taking that unconscious bias lens, but we have to take a step further and said, how are we going to change the pipeline to actually make sure that there are more candidates in consideration for future? And so I bring that up because when it said 58% of hiring managers, or 54% connect with talent acquisition, like that should be 100%. Like whether it's assessing, whether it's creating the pipeline, that ecosystem is just so critical for the talent strategy.
Completely agree. Elizabeth, I'll turn it to you to comment next.
Yeah, and so I'm going to concentrate on the internship program a little bit. And for those that are just starting internship programs or have smaller ones, I'd really think about how and when you're assessing. And so at General Mills, we have a very formal assessment process for our interns where we get together with all the managers in a function and really do a calibration, just like they were full-time employees midway through the summer, and then have one-on-one manager to intern performance check-ins after that midsummer calibration. And then at the end of the summer, we are making decisions. Again, we calibrate with all of the intern managers to make sure we're making the right decision on offers. And so I would really think about how you are structuring that to make sure you're assessing correctly, but also being able to give interns a chance to get feedback. General Mills' philosophy is really making sure we have interns to fill our full-time pipeline. And so we concentrate heavily on our internship program and do very little full-time hiring because we get 10 weeks of assessing someone versus, as Megan was saying, 2 30-minute interviews. And especially in the virtual world, maybe not even a trip to our headquarters in Minneapolis right now. And so making that decision on an intern is really important and part of our key strategy to fill our full-time pipeline. More than ever, if there's any career centers on the call, thinking through for students where they want to intern is going to be more impactful and more important in these upcoming years, because I know a lot of companies are looking at that internship strategy for full-time pipeline as one of the best places to get that talent.
Great. Mark, love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I'll keep my comments pretty brief so we can get to questions. I would echo everything that Megan and Elizabeth just shared here. The only things I would add when Elizabeth was talking about the diversity or thinking about who are your interviewers, there are different capabilities for interviewing on site and in person versus virtual. And some people are much more comfortable and natural in one environment versus the other. And I think we learned that this last year. We had feedback directly from a number of our recruiters like, oh, I thought this was easier, this was more efficient, I liked it better. And others that said the opposite. And so I think the capability side, as well as the diversity of the teams of the interviewers, not just from a age and experience level, but also the makeup of your interviewers to bring to Megan's point earlier, the DEI capabilities and making sure you got broad perspectives, representation that are built into your interview panelists, because that will make a difference during the process as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely so important as we go. And, I want to be able to turn to the questions too. We could have spent just a whole time talking just about this topic as well too, of selection, right? And already some great themes that were kind of brought up. Let me turn to some of the Q&A as well too. And we'll sort of like take a look on here too. I don't know if you guys can also see some of these as well, but one of the questions here about how are you navigating through converting interns? Because of the uncertainty of future, have any of you had pushback from business leads on converting your interns to full-time positions? I think let's start off with that one too, because it gets a little bit to what we were just talking about around the selection, making the decisions with hiring managers too. So I'll let anyone jump in on that one.
I can start here, Donna. Yeah, I think we all have programs here that are, the purpose of the intern program is to eventually be that pipeline into full-time. And that's a big important piece of the interns that we're hiring, is we're as many as we can. The virtual internships did raise concerns for us as well in terms of could we get a valid assessment of that? And we did. And the interns that we were able to convert last year, we actually saw higher conversion rates last year of our virtual interns into full-time than we historically have, and we always have good conversion rates. But we were able to continue on with that and make it work, and excited to get those interns now in a full-time capacity. I think the more hands-on experiences you can give people, the more representative of what the work will look like is important to make sure that not only that you're getting a proper assessment of those students, but that the students really get an accurate representation of what the work will look like when they're on full time. So.
Okay, great. I have a question here actually that's specific. I think it's to Megan here. You mentioned taking several pulse polls with your interns as well. Could you please share some questions that you used in your polls, and were the polls anonymous?
Mm-hmm. They were anonymous, and honestly, they were super simple. And I think we did maybe 5 questions on them. The first weeks, it was super simple. Like, have you consistently met with your manager or your mentor and on the expectations that we set it? And so it was first even just making sure that we were forming the connections and making sure that there was just access to teams, because that was one of the biggest concerns coming into the program. A little bit further along, we did start to ask questions about, are you feeling integrated within your team, things of that nature. And then we do a full in-depth survey at the end of the season as well. And so for us, we wanted to make sure it wasn't exhaustive, but it was the things that mattered most and things that we could quickly kind of pivot.
Okay, great. Okay, another question here from Nathan, which I think is a good one and very much relevant, Elizabeth, to what you were talking about with the interview prep as being sort of a key piece there. So Nathan asked, Elizabeth, thank you for talking about prepping interviewers. I find interviewers often struggle to address issues students want to discuss. So things like social issues, environmental issues, et cetera. How can we empower our managers to authentically deliver this message?
Great question. I think, and especially in the year that we've had, we've got questions on social injustice from, pandemic responses. I mean, I think now more than ever, an FAQ document is needed for anybody that's assessing talent. So we specifically put together talking points to address any questions that come up and make sure that our interviewers are comfortable with those talking points as well. I would say though, if a manager is not comfortable addressing those questions, they shouldn't be interviewing. If they're not comfortable with the stance of what your company is doing or addressing those, that is not somebody you should be having talking to your students. Anybody talking to a student or externally should be well prepped and also just comfortable with what's happening in the company and how the company is addressing things. And so my first order of action would be to definitely put together talking points. If you have a corporate communications team, partner with them. If you have an HR function that you work closely, partner with them. But also make sure you're choosing the right people to represent your brand.
And one quick follow-up on that too, I think would be, to what extent, can you either certify or do you actually, prevent certain hiring managers, even if they are from, say a big hiring function, which has a lot of interns, prevent them from being on the front lines with students there. Prevent sounds very negative, but I'm just thinking about, certify maybe a more positive way to say, look, for this year's class, we're looking for X type of profile. They need to be certified, or they need to not only review these FAQs, they need to go through certain trainings or certain courses there.
Yeah, Donna, just to follow up on that, what we do at General Mills is we put together a big email at the beginning of the season that says, here's interview training, here's unconscious bias training, here are the hot topics that you may be discussing with a student. And so that is all in one big email. And in order to assess a student, you need to do these things and be comfortable with those things as well. And that's where I would then start talking, can your recruiters handle, if there is somebody on your team that you don't want in front of the business, is that the best place to be placing an intern or an early career hire as well?
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Any questions also from Mark or comments, I should say, rather, from Mark or Megan on that one as well?
Really agree.
I agree. We do the same things at Cargill. Yep.
Okay, great. Another question here about, are you considering any type of in-person component for interns as things get safer? Any in-person components?
It's a hard one to decide right now. Our office is not opening up officially until September 7th. We are having limited access to our Minneapolis headquarters right now, starting at the beginning of June. We have a huge internship class as well, not as big as Cargill's or Target's, but it just seems like a lot right now to try to get interns into the building. And so we're assessing that as we're going and hope to make a decision in July on what that looks like.
Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say now, I mean, we're very similar in terms of the schedule that Elizabeth just shared. I think if it was possible to do a trip to get our interns to a site, even if it's for a few days or a week, we would like for that to be able to happen. We don't have the restrictions lifted. We've had some questions already come in like, well, okay, if I was supposed to work in the Minneapolis office and they start opening that up, why can't I do it? We're very conscious about the equitable nature because we aren't going to relocate the interns that located here at this point. And so we don't want to have interns get different experiences. If we're going to end up bringing some of them into the office, we want to be able to offer that to all of the interns so that we can create as consistent of an experience as we can.
Great. We have another question here on tell us about your interview process and please highlight any tools or technology that you've used to streamline the process.
I can start with campus. I would say we keep it pretty simple. We haven't used a ton of tools or technology outside of Zoom to facilitate the face-to-face interview ability, but we've kept it pretty simple, which has allowed us the agility for when we're on campus or virtual. We haven't done any of the gamification and things like that, but continue to kind of pulse the market and keep an eye out in terms of what could improve candidate experience, but also efficiency. When we're talking about high volume, that's the biggest thing that I think we continue to try to consider future solutions for.
Okay, great. Also have another question. I'm trying to get through as many questions as we can. I do want to leave just a couple minutes to share our top tips there too, towards the end before we wrap up, but just a couple more questions here as well. Any tools or technologies used to help screen candidates in this environment where we're seeing so many applications? Obviously, I'll just kind of share that there are many organizations that do have different types of ways of helping with the screening, process as well too. And so it might be the case that you might consider using some of those types of things at maybe different points of your process. And so those are other types of things that could be potentially thought about as well. Another question here on, are any of you incorporating the newly updated NACE career readiness competencies yet in your internship program planning? If so, how? Not yet. Maybe I see some head nods too. I know that's relatively new, right? So, maybe some of the case that, certainly a lot of the different types of organizations that we work with too, they might either have their own career competency models or frameworks that they might be using to have their competencies mapped against those for different interview guides, et cetera. So there certainly could be lots of different ways that we've seen organizations work with those. The research that NACE has done, obviously going into the career readiness as well too, is another great way to be able to kind of do that and have that gauge of what types of competencies you might want to be thinking about bringing into your organization for this level of talent as well. So, Rich's last question, how has being virtual for a year impacted your relationship with the core recruitment schools?
I'm really interested to see what the future of campus recruiting looks like. I know many companies are going school agnostic, and with the tools that are available to recruiters now, I think that's something that will be really at the forefront over the next couple of years, especially as we think about travel budgets, time spent on campus, all of those things. And, we've learned a new way of working. And I know that's something that General Mills is going to be looking at of, do we need core schools? Right now we have a mix of core schools and virtual, like what does that look like? And so I really think the next couple of years are going to be telling, because currently there is no recruiting timeline. We can start interviewing now if we want within the virtual setting. So it'll be an interesting couple of years, I think.
Definitely lots to see evolve in this space, I think, which is really great. I think we went through nearly all the questions here, actually in fairly rapid fire, which was fantastic here too. I just wanted to kind of pull up as we shift to kind of close up in just a couple minutes here to some of the top tips in summary before I turn it through. And I think you'll have seen or heard many of these themes come through across the discussion today. So being flexible and nimble, and Mark, I think, used the word agile as an example, right? We all sort of need to be able to maintain that flexibility as we're kind of going through the process here too. At the very beginning, Megan, you also said, we need to show some grace across the board as we have both candidates as well as our own teams who, of course, are still kind of, leading through and trying to navigate these still uncertain environments. So obviously being flexible and nimble, even the best laid plans sometimes might need to shift, as we kind of all know. We talked about personalizing messages and having meaningful experiences to leave that lasting impression too. So that's certainly something that has come out in a lot of research that we've done with organizations around, what is going to make a meaningful impression to students. And if you're trying to kind of screen them out, you still want to give, even if you're screening out 60, 80% of them, you still want to give them a personalized type of experience to the extent that you can. So in many cases, they will be either customers for life, or they may be future, partners or vendors, even in a B2B context. Mark talked a little bit about being in a different, type of employment situation there too. So the extent to which you can leave that lasting impression too, it does matter, right? Even if they don't get the job as an intern, they may come back later on as a full-time professional at some point. Gathering feedback from the interns we talked about, and you shared some examples of the pulse surveys, right, that you've done with those interns too, and using those opportunities to kind of test and learn as you go. This summer in particular is being a great example for that, and then also figuring out what works for you and your talent strategy. So lots of tips to kind of lead you with too. Obviously, we're thrilled to be able to, partner today with NACE. On that too, we talked mostly about talent acquisition, but of course, lots of different questions across the board. So certainly happy to chat with anybody as well too, to the extent that that would be helpful. And with that, I'll turn it back to NACE to close this out for today's session.
Thank you, Donna Weiss and panelists, for a very informative session. And thank you, participants, for attending today's webinar. This officially concludes the event, and you may now sign off.